Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how you can take some motion capture data from mO2. We'll import that into Cinema 4D and we'll actually create some cloners with some objects on it. We will bake these animations, and we have to actually bake many objects because we're going to be cloning some things, so that's going to be an important step here, and we will be using some espresso tags. We will take that baked Cinema 4D file and we will actually import that as a model into mO2. We'll add some textures, some lighting, and all that good stuff inside of mO2, and then we will finally render it in mO2. And even with the settings set to 4K, I was able to export this animation in about 3 minutes on my MacBook Pro. It's a 2018 model, 15-inch, and it doesn't have the Vega graphics card. It has the 560X, I believe it is. And if I scrub the animation, you can see how we have rotation on all these objects. And we even have some separation in here. We can adjust that in Cinema 4D. And you can see we have some lighting, and then we have this explosion effect right about here where the model explodes. And we're doing all of that in Cinema 4D, baking those animations, and then we're going to use that C4D file in mO2. Now, inspiration for this came from several tutorials that are already available online. One of those is Grayscale Gorilla's building an animated dynamic character. I did follow quite a bit of this, but then I did some things quite a bit different versus what they did here, so I want to show you my take on this. I then used a tutorial for realistic explosions. That's how we can get the model to explode. And then to bake the cloner, when we clone these spheres or cubes or whatever objects you have on your model, we have to actually take each individual shape and keyframe it or bake them to animations. That way we can use this in mO2. Now, good news about Mixamo. This stuff is free to use as long as you have an Adobe account. And head on over to mixamo.com and start browsing the characters. And the one I'm going to be showing you here is this grenade throw. When you go to download, I didn't change any of the download settings. I just went ahead and downloaded that file, just taking note that we are going to run at 30 frames per second. And I actually have that grenade throw FBX file already in the shared folder. And if you've been following along with any of the mO2 tutorials, you'll know that I do have a shared folder where you can find these files. So I'm just going to take that FBX that was downloaded from Mixamo and I'm going to drag it right into C4D. I didn't change any of these settings and I just pressed OK. I'm going to adjust my view. And let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do first of all is we're going to take some spheres. I'm going to adjust the size on that. And something I noticed here, and they also mentioned this in the Grayscale Gorilla tutorial, if I go to the sphere and I try to edit the radius, I cannot do that. Well, if you have your startup layout, or if you know how to access the takes, go to the takes menu and just go to override and lock overrides. So now if I go back to my objects and I have my sphere selected, I can adjust the radius. And I'm going to make this radius, let's just start off around 6. So we have a small sphere. Let's go up to the instance menu and add a cloner. Let's take the sphere, drop it inside the cloner. And this is like an instancer in mO2. If I zoom out and I come to the cloner, if I increase the count, you can see that we have multiple spheres getting cloned. However, we don't want to clone the spheres on a linear mode. We want to actually use an object. Now for the object that we want to use here, I'm going to select the surface. So what this will do is it's taking the alpha surface, and let me hide a few things to show you what we're actually working on. I'm going to hide the hips. I'm going to hide the joints. And really what we're doing here is we're going to clone these spheres onto this surface. And if I rewind to the beginning and I press play, it doesn't look like it's working right, and that is a layering issue. Just take that cloner, drag it down to the bottom of your list. Let's start over again, and now we can see that we have these spheres on the surface of the body. I'm going to zoom back in. Now the distribution, feel free to mess around with this, but I find that surface works quite well. I'm going to increase the count to, let's say, 200 of these spheres. So now we have a bunch of them, and if we just preview this, we don't have the explosion yet, but something I want to focus on now is if I just go ahead and hide the alpha surface as well, that way all we're going to see is the spheres that make up this model. Now what I want to do with this sphere here is I want to apply a rigid body tag. That way we don't have any spheres overlapping. So right clicking on sphere, heading down to simulation tags, rigid body. Now if I reset the animation and we play this, now the balls explode apart, but that's not the explosion that we want here. What you actually want to do with this dynamic tag here, the rigid body, go to the force and we want to follow position, and somewhere around maybe 15 or 20 is going to work pretty good. I'm going to start with 15, and by us setting this number to maybe 15 or 20 or something like that, it's going to make these spheres follow the model instead of falling off of it. But at the same time, we're going to have that rigid body so these spheres will not overlap. Let's reset this, and now as you can see, the spheres are staying there and they're following the model. Now if you lower this number, let's lower it down to 5. Let's reset the animation. And this is going to make them flow a little bit slower so you can have some gaps. Every once in a while it may appear that some of them are separating. And if you raise this number up, I'm going to bump it on up to 20. This will keep it in a tighter formation, or at least that's what I'm gathering from it. And you can see that right there. So 20 is not too bad. But maybe you don't want all of the spheres to be the same size. So to get those random sizes on these spheres, if we go up to MoGraph, we go to Effector and select Random. And what we want to do is we want to do a random size or a random scale. So underneath Parameter, I'm going to uncheck Position. I'm going to check the scale. I'm going to use a uniform scale, and I'm going to set it to 0.5. Now nothing happens because we have to actually apply this effector to the cloner. And inside of the cloner, for the effectors tab, if we pick that random effector, this should apply it now. So if we reset this, now you can see we do have different size spheres. Perfect. So maybe now is a good time to select that sphere. Let's make them a little bit smaller, maybe 3 centimeters. Now that may look too small, so you can bump it on up. But what we could also do now as well is we could increase the number of spheres that we have. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to head to the cloner, go to the object, and I'm just going to increase the count to say 400. Let's reset the animation. And there we go. So now what I want to do is apply some materials. I'm going to apply materials in C4D because that's going to automatically create reference materials in mO2. And if you know what I'm talking about, we got 400 spheres here. Well, if I duplicate this sphere and drop that sphere in the cloner, and I'm going to add 2 different materials. Just going to make these very basic. We'll do a dark green. I'm going to drop that material onto one of the spheres. And then I'm going to come and create another material. Make this one like a gray color. I'm going to drop that onto the other sphere in the cloner. And if I reset the animation, now we have 2 materials, a gray and a green, that are being applied to this model. And when we go into mO2, all of these materials will be referenced to each other. So we can just change one material in mO2, say for the green, and it will apply to all the greens, and the same will apply for the gray. So now what I want to do is I want to take this cloner and I want to duplicate it. I'm going to rename that first one the surface, cloner surface. I'm going to rename this second one cloner joints. Because we do have some alpha joints up here. Now for cloner joints, we do need to change the actual object itself because I did duplicate the cloner surface when I created this cloner joint. So I'm going to change my object to cloner joints. Now inside of cloner joints, notice the effector is still applied because we did duplicate that initial cloner. I'm going to delete one of the spheres and I'm going to mix it up here versus that beginning video. I'm going to actually delete both of those spheres out of there. I'm going to take this cloner joints. I'm going to apply, let's do a platonic. Let's drop the platonic into the cloner joints, and this looks crazy because I need to adjust this size of this platonic way on down. But you can see here, I mean even right there, let's play that. Looks kind of crazy. I'm going to take that platonic, I'm going to bump its radius on down to say maybe 3. I'm going to go to the cloner joints. Underneath object, I'm going to decrease the count for the joints, maybe 200. I'm going to reset my animation and have a look. So wherever we have joints on this model, we're going to have those white platonics. Now you can add more, you can adjust the size. I want the joints to be a little more subtle. And I'm going to apply another material. I'm going to drag that onto the platonic. And now we have our joints. Now something I do notice here, it appears that these platonics are overlapping, as you can see right there. So what I need to do is take that dynamic tag from earlier for the spheres. Just going to duplicate that dynamic tag, add it down here, and now if we reset this animation, we should not have any overlapping platonics. Very good. That makes the joints more visible as well, because since they're not overlapping, they kind of have to build on top of each other. And I tell you what, for that tag, I'm just going to go ahead and make that a darker color. Now, by all means, let's duplicate it if you'd like. Drop that into the cloner, create a new material, and we'll give it a white. Make sure to delete that black one there. Reset the animation. Let's see what we got. So now we are ready to make this thing explode. So he's throwing the grenade, and then he's going to fold his arms underneath his knee, and somewhere right around here, maybe around frame 150, I'm going to go ahead and extend the length of this entire project up to 300 frames. And instead of frame 150, I'm going to do frame 175. Now here's some things that we want to happen. We want the model to explode, but first I'm just going to show you how we can make all these balls and platonics kind of just crumble down to the floor. And to show you that, I'm going to select all of the dynamic rigid body tags. And remember that follow position, we had it set to 20? I'm going to keyframe it. Then I'm going to go forward just one frame to frame 176, and I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm going to keyframe that. Now recall, back at the beginning when we did the follow position, when we applied like a 15 or a 20 to it, before we did that, the ball was just kind of completely separated from the model. Well, watch what happens if we play this through. And notice the follow position set to 20, but when we get up to 175 and then we hit frame 176, it's going to jump down to 0, which is going to cause all of these objects to just fall to the floor. Alright, so they fall to the floor, but that looks very boring. So what we need to do now is add a floor to this scene. I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to make it large, 5,000 by 5,000. And now what I want to do here is I'm going to rotate to where I can see beneath the floor, and I just want to make sure I drag this floor down enough so that I'll have none of these balls sticking through. As you can see, we do have a few here and there. So just sliding that down, taking the plane, I'm going to take its coordinates. I'm just going to make this Y maybe like a -6. Just going to bump up to frame number 1. That's when the object's completely settled in. I guess you could say all of the objects are pushing apart from each other. I'm going to rotate back up. And what we want to do with this plane here is we want to apply a collider body. That's going to be underneath the simulation tags, collider body. Now if we play through this, what's going to happen, the balls are still going to fall, but they're going to interact with each other, the platonics as well, and they're going to scatter on this surface right around frame 175 to 176 is when this transition is going to take place. There we go. Now something to note about the collider body, that is different than this rigid body. The rigid body has those keyframes. The collider body, I don't have any keyframes on that. Now the last thing we need to do here is head on up to Simulate, go to Particles, and let's do an attractor. This attractor is what's going to create our explosion for the model. Going to head on over to Fall Off, and underneath the field object, what we want to do is a spherical field. Let's go back to the object, and let's set its strength to 0. And what I want to do is I want to go to frame 175. 175 is when we had the object getting ready to lose its follow position. All of those dynamic rigid bodies, we had to keyframe from 175 to 176 to lose that follow position. We were setting it from like 20 to 0. Well, right here at frame 175, I want the strength of this attractor to be 0, so I'm going to keyframe it. Going to bump up one frame to 176, and I'm going to set this strength to maybe -1000. Negative so that they push away. Let's keyframe that. Let's go back to the beginning, And now when these balls were originally falling down to the ground, instead what's going to happen now is that these balls are going to push away from each other, and the platonics as well. So there's our explosion, and then you can see the objects are falling back onto this collider body and interacting with that surface as well. Now for a stronger explosion, just going to bump on up to that frame 176. So I'm going to set it to -3000, and I'm going to make sure I keyframe that. One frame back, we're at 0. The next frame forward, we're going to be at -3000. So this explosion is going to be much more powerful. And even if I preview it there, it does not look like it's really going to look, because I just need to replay this. So we have a much stronger explosion there, and adjust that to your liking. Just make sure you keyframe it when you do that. So now we have all of our animations taken care of. We have materials applied, which will create references in mO2. Now what we need to do is take these two spheres in our cloner surface, but recall that cloner surface has 400 of those spheres. We also need to take our cloner joints. There's 200 of those. Well, all we see right now are just 2, and we need to actually create all of these spheres and all of these platonics, and we need to bake all of those animations. This is where the espresso tag is going to come in handy. Let's start with the cloner surface. I'm going to duplicate that. And with cloner surface 1 selected, I'm going to press C to make it editable. And what this does is it creates all of those spheres. Now, what we want to do, now if I go back to the beginning of the animation and I play this, we got a big mess. But what I want you to notice is if I hide the original cloner surface, if I go back to the start of the animation, what you're going to see is that the surface, which is the green and the gray spheres, they're not moving. They're just staying wherever they were when I cloned that cloner. Sure, we see the platonics moving because I still have the cloner joints showing here. But what we want to focus on now is how do we get the animations that we created in the cloner surface? How do we apply those to all, 400 of these objects here? So I'm just going to keep things organized by creating a null. And up here in this null, I'm going to right-click, Cinema 4D tags, and I'm going to head down to Espresso. Now what this is going to do, I don't understand Espresso really good by any means, but what this little setup is going to do is it's going to take every single object in the cloner and it's going to apply it to that duplicated cloner that we made editable, and it's going to apply each sphere its corresponding rotation, scale, position, or whatever else we want to do here. I'm just going to go ahead and add all the pieces that we need. I'm going to search for hierarchy. I'll show you how to connect these in a second. Object index, data, and you can just use the motion graphics data here. And then what we want to do, since we are working on the cloner surface, I'm going to take cloner surface, drag it in right here, and then I'm going to take that cloner surface 1 with all 400 of those spheres, or how many ever it was, and I'm going to drag that up here. I'm going to make some of these a little bit bigger. And here's what we're going to do. Drag the object to the instance. Drag this index right here. For the cloner surface, let's add an object. Let's drag that to the object. Over here on the right hand side of data, let's add global matrix and color. Over here on the blue side for cloner surface 1, let's add object, global matrix, and then underneath basic properties, display color, display color. Let's drag the instance from object index over to object, connect the global matrices, connect the color from data to display color. Now again, I don't understand how this works, but like I said, at the beginning of the video, I showed you several tutorials. This was one of those, the quick tips 6 or 8 or something like that. And pretty much I'm just duplicating that here. All right, we're good with that one. I'm just going to name this Espresso tag. I'm going to name it Espresso Surface. That way I don't get them confused. And I'm going to drag that down here to surface. Now, I still have, I'm going to hide everything, even the joints for right now. So all I see is cloner surface 1. And it's not going to look exactly like what we just had, and it's a hot mess really. It looks like it's more separated, and what we need to do here is go into the cloner surface 1, going to select those dynamic tags. We don't need them anymore because we have actually mapped all of the data from cloner surface over to each individual sphere in cloner surface 1. So I'm clicking on that first dynamic tag and I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, going to hold shift and click the last one, and I'm going to delete them. Now what this is going to do, it's going to make it look like it should. If I back to the beginning now, notice it doesn't look as separated. It should be identical to the original cloner surface. All right, so we had the explosion and we had the balls colliding back to the surface. Now what we want to do is we want to do something very similar for our cloner joints. So let's duplicate cloner joints. We want to make cloner joints editable. I'm going to duplicate that espresso tag. I'm going to rename this one Espresso Joints. And let's double click on Espresso Joints, and we want to delete cloner surface 1 and cloner surface because now we're talking about the joints. So taking the original cloner joints, dragging it here, cloner joints 1, dragging that up here, and let's add those pieces again. Closing out of that. And now if we, okay, since I cloned cloner joints and it was hidden, I need to unhide that. Now we can see the platonics. Let's go back into cloner joints and let's do the same thing. Let's get rid of all those rigid body tags. So selecting the first one, scrolling to the bottom, holding shift, selecting them all and deleting them. Now what we should have, everything is hidden with the exception of the plane and these two cloner surface 1 and cloner joints 1 with the espresso tags. The original objects are hidden. I obviously had the alpha surface and alpha joints hidden, and we never even really messed around with the hips at the beginning. So let's reset this back to the beginning, and this is pretty much what we had with the original cloner surface and the cloner joints. To bake our animations, I'm going to go up to Window, Timeline Dope Sheet. Going to take everything from cloner surface 1, so sphere 0 all the way to sphere 399. That was 400 of them. Holding shift, going to drag those on over. So we have all 400 of those in there. Then we want to come back into the cloner joints and do the same thing. So selecting all of those, 200 of them, dragging those over into the dope sheet. And what we should have here are all the platonics and all of the spheres. Let's select all of them. Sphere 0 all the way down to the bottom. Platonic 199, holding shift. Go to Functions, Bake Objects. For this, I'm not going to create a copy. I'm just going to apply these keyframes directly to these objects, and I'm going to do all the parameters. Position, rotation. We don't have any scale change, but if you did, it would apply that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and bake that. All right, so everything should be keyframed now. And a way we can kind of look and see is, you know, like if I select one of these random platonics, this is the path that it's going to take, including all the movements of the grenade being thrown and then the explosions. I'm assuming these paths here are going to be the paths that that platonic takes when it explodes. I'm guessing it's going to be colliding with some other objects up here, which makes it change paths as it falls back down to the surface. But anyway, let's go ahead and go to File, Save As. I'm going to go ahead and drop this into that same folder, same shared folder. Saving that. And now for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to do this in 1080, roughly 30 frames per second, 300 frames to match that of the Cinema 4D file. I'm going to go ahead and load up mO2. We don't really need a timeline here. I'll keep my project pane. I'm going to add a fade here in a little while. I'm going to fit the canvas to the window. For mO2, underneath the inspector, let's go ahead and import that C4D file. So I'm going to go to Add, Model from Library. I'm going to go to my C4D folder or wherever you want to import it to. I'm going to go to Import. I'm going to head to that folder where I have that file saved. And it was the grenade throw tutorial. Fairly big file. A lot of stuff going on there. A lot of objects. I'm going to choose that. Name it whatever you want. I'm saving it in that subcategory and I'm going to import those materials. Now it may not look right here As you can see, none of these really look like the actual model itself, but I'm going to go ahead and add that to my scene. Alright, so from here I went back and re-recorded this part because if you looked at the Cinema 4D part where I applied the espresso tag, I did put a little text comment when I edited the video. If you were to add the generator's priority, this frame 1, if I'm not mistaken, would show up correctly. You would see the model, but it's no big deal here. I think the priority setting I had applied was expressions. That's like the default one. But anyway, if we go to frame 2, there's our model. Now let's fix this up. Let's go ahead and fix our floor. Let's clear things up. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the control for mO2. I'll leave it on the diamond setting, even though that may slow things down for me as I'm recording the video. But we can still get a good look of what it actually looks like. Heading on over to the camera. For the camera settings, I'm going to set those to sharp. And like I've done in a lot of mO2 tutorials, I'm going to go ahead and reset the parameters for the basic settings. That's going to throw our camera right in the middle of the scene. I'm going to add a null, drop the camera in the null, take my camera and I'm going to zoom on out a little bit so I can see the model. And I'm going to take my null and I'm going to rotate it on the X. And for that X rotation, I'm going to go in the negative direction, maybe not so much. Let's try negative 15. I'm also going to rotate it on the Y to get on the other side of the model. Try 180 first. I'm going to move this entire null up a little bit. That's a little bit too high, maybe 0.5. And I actually want to rotate so I can see a little bit more of the front part of the model. So changing my rotation Y, maybe 210. That looks good. Alright, now from here, inside of that model that we imported, I'm going to go ahead and go to the plane, apply material, and I'm just going to use a new material. And to get a reflective surface real quick for this new material, I'm just going to scroll on down to the metalness, cut it all the way up, take the roughness, cut it all the way down. And now we have a reflective surface, and this is actually reflecting the environment, the default environment for mO2. I want this to reflect the model itself, so I'm going to go back to the plane. I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the plane settings, and for planar reflections, I'm going to enable those. And just like that, we have reflections. I'm going to make my scene dark. I'm going to go to Scene Settings, Background, and for my inner color and my outer color of my gradient, I'm going to make them the same. Now you definitely don't have to do this, but I'm going to. So that's the look I'm going for. That's similar to what you saw in the intro video. Now you could go around in here and mess around with the environment. You know, we had like that brick building getting reflected. So I'm going to go to my environments. I'm going to try one of these CG, maybe a soft, and this soft blended lighting. So with just that minor change, we definitely have a different look here by changing the environment and changing our background. Now let's go deeper into the model and let's go to those cloner surface 1 and cloner joints 1, those two pieces. And inside of here, if I open up cloner surface 1, there are all of our spheres. And let me show you something real quick. Like for sphere 0, if I unhide the timeline, if I go to sphere 0, and this is going to be the same for all the spheres, you can see that this thing has a lot of keyframes in it. Position, rotation, yeah, there's one applied to the scale, even though the scale never changes. But baking those animations, that's what this is doing. It's creating all of those keyframes, and as a matter of fact, if I show the keyframe editor, look at that. That's a lot going on. That's why this file is pretty big. But that's being applied to all of these objects, baking those animations and then importing that model into mO2. So I'm going to hide the timeline again and hide my keyframes. But anyway, let's go ahead and apply some different materials. And I mentioned, since we did apply a material to the spheres, when I click on this first one, the green one, notice all of these other green ones are highlighted because they're references. So I can easily edit just one material, the green one, and it's going to change all of them. So I'm going to go to Basic Surfaces, and I'm just going to get something with a little bit more character to it, I guess. Maybe this yellow one here. That looks pretty cool, right? But I'm going to keep that color somewhat green. How about a moss color? All right, I like that. I'm going to go to that gray one now. And by me simply changing this one gray one, it's going to change all the gray balls just like the green ones changed. Basic Surface 25. Just got a slightly different surface to it, and I'm going to apply a different color here as well. Maybe aluminum. All right, that looks good. Closing up Cloner Surface 1. Going to Cloner Joints 1. We got two surfaces in here as well. And just to make these stand out, I'm going to do something a little bright on these. So for that first material, for Platonic 0, I'm going to go with this orange here. All right, so we can see those joint platonics kind of coming through. We'll apply a light in a moment to make this show even more. And then I'm going to go apply another bright one for the other ones, the odd numbers, Platonic 1, 3, etc. I'll go with a white. So now we can clearly see all of our different objects with different materials. Let's apply a light. I'll close up, clone our joints 1, and I think we're pretty much done with the object. So add light, sphere light. And for this sphere light, I don't want to render the shape. I do want to enable shadows, and I'm going to drag it in the negative direction on my X. So let's just try something like -3. So that moved it in this direction, and you can see that does change the way this looks. I'm going to bump the Y on up, maybe a +3. So that puts the sphere light roughly somewhere up in here in front of the model's face. Now you could switch over to perspective for this, but I've covered changing it around with your cameras and using these things up here to move your camera around. But for now, I'm just going to add a second light, duplicate it. And now we have 2 lights in the same position, but I actually want to move this light. I want to take its X position, put it back to 0, still leaving the Y position at 3. So that's going to put the light right above the model, and you can see it does get a little bit brighter right above it. I'll bring it back on down. So here we are right back at the beginning. And I'm going to drag out on the Z position. Let's try -3 for the Z. That's going to bring the light in this direction here. And then I'm going to move it on up again, maybe +3. And maybe bump this intensity down a little bit. And just by hiding these lights, you can see the effects that we're getting. So hiding that light I just duplicated, that does actually activate a few more shadows from this front light. But if I disable both lights, this is what the scene looks like without any lights. So re-enabling the second light I added, that's the one from over here on the side, and then re-enabling that first one. Maybe that's a little too bright, so I'm going to bump down the intensity on this first one as well. And you can adjust this to your liking, obviously. As a matter of fact, I'm going to just completely disable that second light I added, and now I'm ready to render. But actually, before we render, if I go back to frame 1 again, remember I did mention that espresso tag priority. It looks like the object's already exploded. No big deal. Going to frame 2. The object's ready, so I'm going to go with mO2 selected, behaviors, basic motion, fade in and out. So at frame 2, we're fading in, and if we actually go back to frame 1, we don't even see anything because of this fade in. And we can actually apply a start offset of maybe, let's go to 2 frames. So now frame 1, we won't see anything. Frame 2, we shouldn't see anything. Maybe even frame 3, but once we hit frame 4, it is going to start to fade in. And let me show you that. And there you go, frame 4 starting to fade in. Now I'm just going to go scrub around on the project just to see how things look, especially with the explosion, because some of these objects are going to get brighter because they're getting close to that light. Scrubbing a little bit more. This is when they hit the ground, and I am cool with that. Let's go ahead and render this. Go to Share, Export Movie. Now with these settings I have here, Apple ProRes, it does create a big file with the render quality set to best. And I'm only on 1080 here, but with 4K, it does make a big file. I don't know how big it's going to be here with the 1080, but I'm going to go ahead and render it. And I will say this, go back and tweak the camera presets, the settings, and add whatever you want to this scene, but I'm good with this. So you saw the render time there, very quick, and here it is in 1080. Not bad. I'll go ahead and save this project, and I'll put this in that shared folder as well, the 1080 copy. And then this one here was the one in 4K. Now that one does look different with the explosions, and some things I did mention in the C4D part of this tutorial where I typed in some things that I was editing. For that particular animation that you see here, the explosion is a lot more. I made the spherical field quite a bit bigger, and I don't remember the exact settings I had for that one, but you can always go back and play with those settings in Cinema 4D. But if you change anything in there, you'll have to go back and rebake those animations, doing the espresso tags, doing the cloning, and I'm sure there's quicker ways of doing that too. If you have any suggestions, please leave those in the comments below, or if you have any questions, do that as well. And there you have it, taking a Cinema 4D project, baking the animations, and importing those into mO2. And that's it for this video. I hope it helped.